it is such a pleasure to have Annie here in town with us from the East Coast. Yes, I've had a great chance to get to know Annie while she's here. As you heard, I'm Owen. I'm the CEO of Mark, which is the leading provider of brand templating. We make it quick and easy for everybody to create on-brand templates. We're one of the Silicon Slopes companies. I've spent my career in the arena of marketing and communications, and I feel so lucky to get to be here with Annie, a true pro, and to talk about her experience in the realm of PR and to share that with all of you. So Annie, I would love for people to have a chance to get to know you. After we talk here for a bit, we will do a Q&A. So if you've got some questions that you want to ask about PR, and I know some people came that have questions in mind, they wrote me in advance, please be ready with your questions when we get done. But Annie, could you tell us a little bit about how you grew up and a little bit about your personal life before we get into the work stuff?
Sure. I grew up on the Jersey Shore, born and raised, so a proud Jersey girl.
Like legitimate Jersey Shore, right next to the shore, right?
Legitimate, about a mile away from the shore. It's a lovely place, very different than the show portrays it.
Well, you say that, but what's the name of your husband?
Michael Sorrentino, not the situation. Different, completely different human being.
So you grew up there, and then, you know, I know they mentioned a little bit in the intro, you got into the world of TV. I have it listed here that you worked at MSNBC, ABC, Fox News, CNBC, CNN, and I'm curious, you know, why you hated CBS or some of these other platforms that you didn't work for. I mean, how did you...
There just wasn't enough time.
But that is an incredible string and a run of places you worked. What are some things that you learned during that phase of your career?
Well, I learned so much, but when you're a TV news producer, you have to produce every single day. There is a live show every single day. So your deadline is the 8 hours that you're working at your desk. So I think it really prepared me to deliver quickly, multitask, and just as I worked as a booker, so I was responsible for greeting the guests who would come on the show, meet them in the green room, and then bring them into the studio. So I had a lot of training in schmoozing and meeting people and connecting, and it was really a good training ground for PR.
And at the time when you were coming up, where were you hoping that career would lead you? Where did you think it was headed?
I thought I would be the next Katie Couric. That did not happen.
Did not happen yet.
There's still time. When I was younger, I seriously did. I, on the Jersey Shore, would grow up watching the Today Show and just thinking she was so wonderful and likable and relatable. And then I quickly realized when you work in TV news, it's really difficult. It's hard hours. There's a lot of pressure, and found myself more gravitating towards the producing side of things. So my initial instinct at the time was to just keep growing in my career, trying out different networks and seeing which one really felt like home.
Well, and a little twist came, I think, which led you into the world of PR. And we heard some about Pace PR. How did it start? What's the origin story?
The origin story. So I was working as a producer for Donnie Deutsch. Some of you may know who he is, famous advertising executive. He had a show on CNBC called The Big Idea, and his show got canceled. So I found myself at the age of 28 without a job, very, very suddenly. And so I did what most young women would do. I cried and called my mom, and then after I picked myself up, I sent an email out to everyone in my network and said, I lost my job and I need one. Do you have any recommendations? And I got an email back that really changed the whole course of my career, my life. It was from a publicist who I had worked with frequently, booking his guests on Donnie's show. And he said, Annie, I don't think you have any formal PR training, but you know a lot of people. I have a client, he's a broker, he wrote a great book on the stock market. If you can get him booked on any show on CNBC, I'll pay you $500. I said, okay, well, let me see what I could do.
Sounds pretty good.
Yeah, no, I mean, when you're 28, it was a good deal. So I checked him out. He looked good. He looked legit. I sent his info to my friend, and he was booked and live on the air the very next day. And that was my proverbial light bulb moment where I realized, okay, there might be something here.
That is so cool. And then, let's talk just a little bit more so people have context as well. What is the story of Pace PR today? What are you actually doing with your clients? I know there's a big client base of well-known brands. national and international. Can you tell the audience a little bit about what you're doing on a day-to-day basis now and what the company's doing?
Sure. So Pace PR is a full-service public relations company that focuses on media relations. So clients come to us and we partner with them to help them achieve their goals via the media. So we have the client over here, the media over here, and we're the middle guys. So when I first started out, it was a lot of more individuals or smaller companies, and we still work with a ton of startups, but it's grown a lot where now we're working with some public companies, very, very large companies as well. We have a business vertical, lifestyle vertical, and thought leadership. So we touch a lot of areas, but the common thread amongst all of our clients is that they recognize the value in consistent media placements and helping their brand, and that's where we come in.
And just so people would know, 'cause I think there's a lot of people here who have probably thought about hiring a PR firm, but may not know what it's like. Is it typically more of an engagement-based, or more of a recurring retainer, long-term relationship kind of thing?
Yeah, so the best way to really think about partnering with a PR firm is in a longer term sense. A lot of times clients will have an announcement or a launch of something, and then we can sort of work together on that project basis. But when you find a great agency and you work together in a longer term capacity, that's really where you can start to see some bigger things really coalesce and come together. So we do work with our clients on a longer term contractual basis. Monthly retainer is kind of the standard.
Really great stuff. Thanks, Annie. So let's switch gears a little bit. If any of you read the kind of intro to this session, it talks about how trust in media institutions is very low right now, and the media landscape, as we all can see and experience, is changing rapidly. And I'm curious what you see as kind of the future of journalism, the future of media in this environment.
I mean, wow. It's it's going to change a lot. It already has in the past, 10 years, if you really think about it. I think that there is so much more accountability in the media now than there ever was. Sort of reached a peak of the opposite of that distrust during the 2016 election and everything that sort of came along with that. And I think the viewers got smarter. The readers of different publications got smarter and started not just taking what they were reading or watching as gospel, but actually reading it with a lens of, a little bit of their own intelligence and saying, okay, wait a minute, let me read some other sources here and see if I can deduce what is actually the truth and what's actually happening. So a bigger trend right now that I'm seeing is, of course, there are the large media institutions, but a lot of the journalists themselves are sort of branding themselves as their own sort of entity. And I think that's going to be a really popular trend with different journalists sort of like breaking away in time from the mainstream media outlet and maybe starting their own Substack, or starting their own website. So I think that's a way where if you really grow to like somebody and you've checked them out and you feel like they're trustworthy, you can go directly to the source, so to speak. And I think another big trend is the hyper-local news process that really sort of took off during COVID for obvious reasons. People wanted to understand what was happening right in their area with regard to the virus. And outlets like Patch.com, which probably a lot of you are familiar with, have a really, really high trust rating and a really, really good, consistent readership for their newsletters and on their website. Because with local news, there's not as much room to sort of take an opinion. It's more steeped in what's actually happening, what's actually the facts going on. So I think that trend will continue.
Really interesting, and being that what it is, I'm curious about some advice for startups and how they should think about PR. And before I get into that, it's a little bit hard to see in the audience, but just by raise of hands, I'm curious, and I know a startup can be defined a lot of different ways. How many of you out there feel like you're working at a startup right now? By raise of hands. How many of you feel like you'd like to have a startup at some point if you're not running one now? Some entrepreneurial folks up there. So let's talk about PR for a startup, and in particular, if you could just help us think through, if you've got a startup, what's the right timing to think about PR? What are some goals that would make sense to have when it comes to PR? And when are you kind of ready as a startup to think about PR?
Absolutely. So the simple answer is it's different for each and every startup, truly, because there's a lot of factors that go into play. I would say hiring an external agency probably will be a little bit further down the road once you're established. However, there are a lot of PR tactics that you yourself or a member of your company, of the startup, can actually do that are pretty simple to kind of get yourselves on the map, so to speak, with regard to media coverage. So, when you first launch, that's a moment, right? You've launched your company. And so we really advise startups to reach out to their relevant trade publications and make those introductions. Let the reporters at the trade pubs know, hey, we're here, we've just launched, this is what we're all about. They may not do a story right then and there, but it's a real moment that is genuine and will likely result in an ongoing relationship as you have more newsworthy events to promote as you go on. The other thing I think a lot of startups can do is think locally. A lot of different newspapers or local TV shows have like a spotlight segment or a focus on a local business. There's no reason why yours couldn't be featured in those types of outlets. So those are some of the simple steps media facing wise, but there's a lot you can do also just internally in terms of your own content creation and your own social media channels to really start having your startup behave in a way that's going to be receptive to the media.
Really helpful there. In my past, I spent time growing and building an agency myself, a marketing agency, and people would ask me, how do I get things shared online? And the core of that is, I would say, you need to have something worth sharing. That's where it all starts, and you figure out all the tactics on top of that. And I think that the same thing may be true in the news. If people say, I want to be in the news, the place that probably starts is have something to share that's newsworthy. What do you think it means to have something newsworthy in the context of a startup or a growing business here?
Well, it really depends on what media outlet you're pitching. So if you are a startup, but you're doing an event that's open to your local community, then that is a relevant time to reach out to your local media outlets, whether they're TV, digital, print, radio, et cetera. I think when you're thinking about what is newsworthy, it's really important to research the outlet you're trying to get yourselves featured in and get a sense of the type of coverage they have been doing already. That's going to give you some insight into what they cover and what might make a good pitch for you and your startup. A lot of times startups will want to announce like a new hire or things along that.
Or a new feature.
A
if
new
you're a software company.
Yeah, and that's
not a lot of people care.
I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I think it's much more relevant. Certainly, if you've raised a decent amount of capital, then there's definitely those reporters that you can go to. But it's really about if you are doing something that nobody has ever done before, that you need to start thinking that way, but then thinking about it in the context of why would the reporter care? And then why would the viewer or reader of this publication care on the receiving end? What's in it for them? You have to always sort of be thinking that way when you're reaching out to the media.
And another thing I'd love to know more about is, when I think about my friends that are working in newsrooms, they're busy. Maybe busier than ever with just kind of the way the media landscape works today. So what would you say about making things easy for the newsrooms that people are pitching?
The first step, and I'm going to sound like a broken record, but research the person you are pitching and the show or the newspaper that they write for. I can tell a quick story here of what not to do. When I was a producer at HLN, I worked for an anchor called Jane Velez Mitchell. Love Jane. Anybody who watched her show for 4 seconds would know that she was a vegan, alcoholic lesbian. And she was sober for 20 years, and that was her shtick, and she was so proud of it. So one day I'm at my desk and I get a pitch come in my inbox and, hi Annie, I work at this new vodka company and we were hoping Jane would like to do a live taste test on air. And
At a barbecue.
Yeah.
I'm kidding, you know. Like, right?
With a
Just
side of
layer
pork
it on.
ribs.
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
and so I just wrote this person back and was like, first of all, Jane's sober, so no. And second of all, we are a news show where we cover mostly crime stories. This is like completely not relevant. So the publicist responds, I'm so sorry, you were on like a big list, I didn't mean to send it to you, yada yada. And you know, it's fine, mistakes happen, but when you're pitching a producer, the producer or the reporter holds all the power, especially if you're kind of just starting out or, you know, really trying to get coverage. And so the biggest piece of advice I can say is to research who you are pitching. And by that, it can really take about 10 minutes, you know, see the recent articles they wrote, watch a couple clips of a recent show, and start out your email to them saying, hey, Annie, I really loved the show last night. I love the segment where, you know, Jane was talking about this crime story. You know, by the way, I represent a retired law enforcement official. So if Jane ever needs a subject matter expert, I'd love to connect. Okay, at least I'm gonna know that that person took the time to actually take it seriously. And I think that's the biggest problem. When I was a producer, I would get 300 pitches a day, every day. And all of them would get deleted unless they were really spot on or I knew the person who was sending me the pitch.
Thank you for that. What makes someone good to be on TV? You know, I know you've got a lot of people placed in a lot of really cool shows. What makes someone good? And I'm basically asking, what do I need to do, Annie, to make it in the bright lights?
Well, no, you would do great.
That's what I was hoping for. Very good. Gonna get something booked right here. Good.
Well, first you need somebody who wants to go on TV. You know, you can, with media training, work with your C-suite or your founder, you know, to sort of get them ready. But if you're trying to put someone on TV who's just super shy and really, really doesn't want to do it, try to find somebody else if you can, would be my first piece of advice. The next thing is really about thinking about the presentation. So you need to think about having good posture and sitting up straight.
Good point.
You need to think about wearing something appropriate. Like, these pants are way too busy. I would never wear them on TV. You know, wear a solid color, a nice jewel tone. You know, make sure that you are familiar with the space you're going into. Is it a live on-set interview where you're talking one-on-one with somebody, or are you going to be in a remote flash cam looking into a camera the whole time with an IFB earpiece? But really, the most important thing is that you want to be able to get your message out there, because TV interviews tend to only be a few minutes long. So you want to make sure that you really prep your founder, whoever it may be, so that way he or she can really start to identify how to weave in some of those messaging points in a germane way that's not going to be overtly like sort of advertising, because if you do that, if you're too promotional for your company, that's a big no-no, and the producers will be upset if you did that.
Great input there. I'm curious what you've seen that's been a really big PR blunder or mistake. Anything come to mind that you've observed, or is like, man, they really blew it on that one?
Yeah, we were talking about before a little bit, but I'm sure everybody, or at least knows peripherally, about the Chris Cuomo situation at CNN, and I think that was a real moment for them where they could have probably taken some steps to avoid the PR fallout from that situation, but instead they sort of had to act on the reactive end after, you know, sort of the masses were calling for, you know, some more oversight in that situation. And that's really what it comes down to in PR when you're thinking about a crisis or what not to do. You want to always be thinking about, how can I get ahead of a situation? And the best way to do that really is to always loop in your comms team, your publicist, into big decisions that are happening, and take them seriously. I think that unfortunately, the chief communications officers and others on PR teams at major companies may not feel like they have a seat at the table in the same way that some of the other executives do, and that's really just to the detriment. If PR isn't let in at the onset or before something happens, then immediately the CEO is going to be like, okay, now there's a problem, fix it. But if they were brought in before, it probably could have been avoided or mitigated.
And the other side of that coin I'd be curious about is a huge success that you've seen, because I think some people think about PR and they realize there's a longer term investment, and some things you can measure that come from that, and some things you can't. But what would be a big success story that comes to mind?
One of my favorite stories that happened a few years ago is we were working with a nonprofit called Concern Worldwide. They're a global nonprofit dedicated to eradicating hunger in some of the most depraved countries around the planet. And we were working with the CEO of the U.S. division, Colleen Kelly, and it was about to be Thanksgiving. So since they work to eradicate hunger, we came up with the idea to pitch Bloomberg TV a segment that would be about their organization, with sort of the lead-in of Thanksgiving is happening tomorrow. It's the day when traditionally Americans eat the most food and waste the most food. But did you ever stop to think about all the people around the globe that never have enough to eat? Here to share more is Colleen Kelly, right? And so she did this segment, and it was really so wonderful. It was basically like a 3-minute commercial for the nonprofit, which was awesome. And then she called me about an hour or two after the interview to let me know that they got a call into their New York office because someone was watching the interview and donated $1 million to their nonprofit. So that was like the best feel-good moment I could ever ask for.
So cool. Well, thanks for sharing that. Are there any other tips that you would share, just kind of generally, for people that are thinking about PR for their businesses, and anything else that maybe we didn't hit on yet?
Yeah, I think if you're sort of bootstrapping it, or the one who's suddenly in charge of doing PR for your company, I think just try to carve out time either every day or every week to set aside to thinking about it and actually having some action items you can check off on your list. A really simple way I think that can get you in the mindset of PR is to become more active on your social media, especially LinkedIn. So on LinkedIn, you can think of yourself or your founder or CEO as a thought leader within the space. And so you can take the opportunity to write almost like an op-ed, but for LinkedIn it would be much shorter, wherein your CEO or yourself or whoever it is weighs in on a trending issue in the space and just gives your point of view, gives your experience of why you think this was a good move, or the article you read really resonated with you. By doing that, you're going to get yourself in the practice of thinking of yourself as that subject matter expert and thought leader. And then once you get writing a little bit more, you can take some of those pieces and really easily translate them into a contributed article or an op-ed for a major newspaper or website.
Really helpful stuff. Thank you. And I think there probably are a lot of people here who have responsibility for PR in their organizations. There's probably a lot of people here who don't as well. But what everybody has is their own personal brand. And I think people are here because they have hopes and dreams too of things they want to do in the future. How would you think about PR applying to the personal brands of everybody that's here?
Absolutely. And even if you're thinking, I don't have a personal brand, not me, yes, you do, because you have a digital footprint, you have social media, and so you are a public-facing, person like everyone is these days. So I think it's really about maybe not for PRing yourself, but it's about promoting who you are in the context of furthering your career and that trajectory. And so I think you want to really first think about, is what's online reflective of who I am today? On your social media, do any articles pop up? Take that sweep, and really take the time to do that. And then I think it's important to think about what it is that you do that makes you stand out and special. What is your ROI that someone's going to get by working with you? Is it that you are this insane multitasker? Is it that you have all these connections that you can leverage in multiple ways? Are you great at running events? Whatever it may be, but really drill down on that. And I encourage everyone to also kind of like poll or interview your former colleagues, your current colleagues, your family, your friends, and ask them what they think really makes you special. Ask them what they think you suck at. Like, it's good to know what you're good at and what you're not good at. And it's about just like, again, putting that time in as much as you can. Like Arianna Huffington always talks about taking the micro steps. So 5 minutes a day, set an alarm. You know what? Let me think about my personal brand, because if you don't think about it, someone else is gonna put you in that box, and you want to be the driver of your own narrative.
Really great advice. Thank you, Annie. And I've got more questions I'd love to ask, but I do want to save time for folks in the audience who have questions too. We have about 15 minutes. I know it might be a little bit hard with the audio, so if you can just make sure you speak up or come down a little closer if you have a question so I can hear you. And I'll also repeat the question on the mic for those who may not hear it. So if you've got any questions out there, let's go ahead and turn it over for a little Q&A in the audience.
We do also have a microphone to the right of the stage if you are looking at it. So
yeah, you actually have to come up here and you have to sing one song of karaoke, and then you'll be allowed to ask your question. Just kidding.
Otherwise, I do have a microphone as well, so I can pass it around.
Perfect, thank you. And so just so I can see the hands, anybody who's got a question here? I think we see some up there. Go for it.
Thank you so much, Annie. It's really great information. I actually handle I handle PR for Best Friends Animal Society. So I was really curious about some of this new content creation and that kind of thing. But my question is, I understand that journalists usually have a huge following on Twitter. How important do you think LinkedIn is for a PR tool? And how do you utilize it the best?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn is really important for the promotion of your company. So when you have company news, that's the place to announce it. We use LinkedIn a lot when we sign a really big client, or when we have a great new hire to share, sort of tout some of our own successes. But I think LinkedIn is important for the individuals within the company. And I think it's more about using it as that platform to elevate yourself as the thought leader and as a subject matter expert. You can do that on Twitter too, but Twitter only really works if you're super active all of the time. LinkedIn can be a much less frequent cadence for posting, 1 to 3 times a week, I think, is sort of the recommendation there. But remember, LinkedIn only populates in people's feeds if you're also active in liking and commenting on other people's posts. So you have to make sure you build in that time as well. I think for journalists though, Twitter is where they're at, and that's where we do most of our, if we're gonna do social media outreach, we'll reach out to more political or financial or news reporters on Twitter. A lot of times we will DM more lifestyle reporters on Instagram.
Really interesting. And just one follow-up question while we're grabbing somebody else for the next question is, I gotta admit that I hate some of the LinkedIn influencer content. I mean, we've all seen it, like the little sentence that then expands, and it kind of can become cliche. Any tips on standing out and doing something different than maybe what is become, again, a bit of a cliche approach to LinkedIn posting?
I think a little of it is going to be trial and error, because you have to really capture your authentic voice. And that's a little bit easier said than done, because if you're not used to posting frequently, you may be there, what do I write? How should I go about this? So one thing I try to do is just to engage my community by tagging people, and sharing it and sending it along with people, but also taking the time to comment on their posts as well, so that way they'll remember to hopefully, do the same with me. So I think it's a little bit about just playing around with it until you can really figure out what works.
Maybe give yourself a little grace too, I guess, as you're getting going and figuring out your voice, right? Let's take another question from the audience. I know
Hi there.
some
Hi,
other
Annie.
hands. Go ahead.
Thanks for sharing. So I work in the media measurement space. We hear a lot of words like ROI and proving value, and I bet that's something you see a lot in your work. And for those here who are, trying to say, well, why should I be pitching the media, or why should I partner with that influencer? What are some of the recommendations you have for connecting this communications work to some of those, lower funnel metrics or some of that value? What would be your recommendations for those in that, having that question?
Yeah, it's a frequent one for sure, that we get asked all the time. How do I measure, the money I'm paying you? How do I know what the value is in this? And way back when we used to measure a TV segment versus the advertising dollars, that would be on, and inevitably what you're paying your PR firm is like a teeny tiny fraction of what it would cost, to have a commercial in that same space. I think now the way that we are able to measure ROI in the best capacity is with digital placements, when there is that hyperlink back to our client's website, because then they have the Google Analytics and the tools on their side to measure exactly, okay, who's popping to our website based on this particular article. And so that's one way that I think we really measure it. With influencer marketing, we honestly, we don't really do that at all, and I think it's had a few iterations. At first it was really awesome, then people were kind of down on it, and now there's more of this trend of the micro influencers, who really have the connection to your specific audience. So there could be some value in that, but it can also be really expensive to go that route. So when I'm talking to clients about this, I try to just remind them that PR and working with the media truly is qualitative and not quantitative, and the only real way to measure it is to give it time, whether that be 3 months, 6 months, or a year, and see how it's helping your business evolve and grow. We have instances where we'll book clients on a national TV interview. This has happened before, and my client will meet somebody in the green room, and then 2 months later, he has a partnership with the person that he met in that green room, or they'll become friendly with somebody who interviewed them, and another business deal will sort of take place. All the time it happens. Doing the media will lead to publishers reaching out to that person and saying, oh, would you like to write a book, or how about a podcast? So there's a lot of those intangible qualities that you can't really plan for, but that I have seen pop up and arise all of the time.
Thanks for the question. Let's go ahead and go to another one in the audience.
Hi, I was previously majoring in communications, but then I swapped my major because I had a different opportunity. But I'm still interested in the field.
Sorry about that. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I'm still very interested in the field in the future. I'm kind of worried it's a big mistake. I'm just wondering, how important is actually getting that degree, like for communications journalism, for both in the sense of understanding the field and being able to be prepared for it, and also having the qualification check mark on a resume to get a job in the future, because I'm not sure if I want to go back to that in the future. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Well, I'm an adjunct professor in PR at NYU, so I'm supposed to say it's super important, but I don't believe that, actually. I think that if you have no training whatsoever, or like you didn't take any classes undergrad, in comms, then, and you feel like, I really need this education to even just have a clue about what I'm doing or what I'm about to get into, then it's a great idea. And I mean, in all honesty, education is never going to be a bad thing. But PR, much like journalism, is one of those fields you really learn by doing it. So to me, I think having a degree in comms makes absolutely no difference in getting hired. What I think is the big differentiator for when I'm going to hire somebody or not is, are they a good writer? We learned a lesson early on that we always give a writing test, out to all levels when we're hiring, because we've been burned sometimes before, and with PR, you're writing multiple pitches a day. So you have to be a good writer and you have to be quick at it as well. So I think if you have that real burning desire, then it is a good idea, but I think you're probably going to learn more on the job by finding an agency that you really vibe with and feel like it can nurture your growth.
Great question, thank you. And just to follow on to that one, I love the quote that good writing is actually good thinking. Just curious if there are people here who, just hearing what you're saying and are thinking, I would really love to improve as a writer. Any tips you'd give some people to kind of take the next step in their ability to write well?
Right. Do it as much as you possibly can. I would ask for your colleagues to review what you've written and give really, unvarnished feedback to you. I would review how your colleagues write their pitches or their press releases. There are, there are a lot of writing seminars and courses that you can take out there. It's a little hit or miss, I think, how much value you're going to get from those. But if you do some research or talk to folks in the program who've taken it, that can be a good idea as well. But when you're thinking about writing in the context of pitching and PR, is that me? When you're thinking about pitching and writing in the context of PR, I think actually it's a good idea to kind of change up your writing style when you're reaching out to journalists. The worst thing you can do is sound like a robot, right? Yeah. When you're reaching out to a reporter, they're a person too. It's okay to be like, hey, read your article, loved that one quote, or reference something that you know about them on a personal level, or start off with a little joke, or a reference to something that's happening, that's not related to their field. All of those tips, I think, will help to deepen those relationships.
Really great, thank you. We've got time for just maybe one or two more questions.
Does anyone else have a question here? I know, Owen, you had a couple more as well. If you do, stand up.
I've got just a couple more that I want to build on. If there's others
one
up there, I think there's
Yep.
one here. Go for it.
Hello. I had a question on how you identify what a hyper-local news network is. Like, what are signs and that you see that makes you think they are a hyper-news network?
I think when you say local news, you think of, okay, the Salt Lake Tribune, or the local NBC affiliate, ABC affiliate. Those are local news. Hyper-local news is taking it even more granularly, so to this specific neighborhood. Like, I live on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, so I read the Upper West Side edition of Patch.com, and that's going to tell me everything that's happening within my zip code. So it's really based on the specific zip code and small area that you're living in.
Thank you.
Thank you all for the questions. Just to kind of wrap it up, I would ask you if there's anybody out here who is early in their career in PR, is there anything you'd share with them? I think there may be some people who are looking at what you've done and thinking, wow, that would be a really cool career path. Anything you'd share with that group of people as we get ready to wrap up?
Sure. Say yes to everything. You're young, you have the energy, go to every event, go to every party, go to every client meeting in person that you possibly can. Ask questions. People who are more senior want to train. They want to help you grow in your career. Volunteer to help with another project that's outside of the specific accounts that you're working on. And I think really just think about, as you go along in your career, what do you enjoy the most? Ask yourself that all the time. What am I enjoying the most? What am I not enjoying the most? And then the things that you're really loving, you have a job to do, but don't just stay in that square. Are there ways that you can bring more value to the company, outside of being in that box, or ways that you can improve the process for the company? We're 20 people now, but I still feel like we're kind of a startup. And so when a staff member comes to me and says, Annie, I was thinking we could refine our process here and it would be a lot better, I welcome that. Like, that is awesome. And that shows me that they're taking initiative and that they really care about their career.
Thank you so much, Annie. Let's give Annie a huge ovation, and thank you for coming out here from New York to be here with us. And Annie, thank you so much for being a part of the Silicon Slopes community. We hope you will come back again. We'd love to have you here. Thanks,
sure.
everybody, for the
Thanks.
great session. We appreciate it.